I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, and I am hosting on behalf of Common Sense Edmonton. We're doing this series of interviews with candidates for the upcoming municipal election in Edmonton. And joining me now is Tyler Zutz. Tyler, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Danielle.
Now, you are running in a riding that is numbered Ward 2, but why don't you tell us the name of your riding?
Sure, it's Anirniq.
Do you know what it means?
Breath of life.
All right, Anirniq.
Yeah. It's in reference to the Charles Camsell Hospital, which was a TB hospital for Indigenous people quite some time ago.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm learning the names as we go along, so I appreciate the education. So Tyler, tell us why it is you decided to run for council at this time.
Yeah, I decided to run for council because I've been, I don't know, a little bit unimpressed with the direction of city council over the last couple of years, or last couple of terms, I guess. I've been running a consulting business for quite some time in Edmonton, and we've put that on hold for now in order to run. And I would like to return representation back to the people of Edmonton and give them a voice at city council. I feel like city council too often is representing their own or corporate issues and initiatives and special interest groups. And I think it's time for more of a grassroots effort for someone that's committed to listening to the constituents of their ward.
So you said you've been unimpressed with the direction in the last few years, and you gave sort of an indication of the things that have been troubling you. Can you give us a specific example?
Yeah, primarily, my main issue is personally councillors that aren't engaging their ward and making decisions without that sort of a feedback loop, and then not providing reasoning or support for why they've made those decisions. I think if you're going to leverage social media to sort of advertise yourself and your brand, that you should be active enough to respond and engage with your constituents, particularly before issues. I also think that Edmonton has spent quite a bit of money and interest and time on sort of vanity projects and things that are not value added to our ward. They're oftentimes concentrated downtown and bike lanes and big art projects and funiculars, sort of big grandiose projects where people in their wards are seeing things like their parks not being mowed and cutbacks on sort of basic core services that actually provide value to them. And I'd like to bring, go ahead.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about that. What are the things that you're hearing are a priority for your ward?
Yeah, I really think, the province is peeling back infrastructure funding from municipalities in the next 4 years at a minimum. So we have a lot of projects that are planned right now that aren't going to be funded. So I think with that shortage of money and no appetite or ability for taxes to increase, city council needs to work collaboratively with their constituents to define a list of core services. And those core services look like policing and fire and road maintenance and road clearance and keeping their parks up to date, libraries. But I think it's government and municipal government's initial reaction is just to grow and grow into all of these areas that aren't core services that constituents aren't looking for. I think Edmonton's middle management has grown 10% in the last 3 years, and I haven't knocked on one door where anybody said, boy, those middle managers are providing value to us. They see and feel the hits to service reductions, especially in core services. And I think with a limited amount of dollars to go around, we're going to need practical, representatives. But I think first and foremost, we're going to need representatives that are reaching out to their constituents and aren't just assuming this is what we need to do and this is what my views personally are. That needs to be a collaborative effort with everybody that lives in the city. Otherwise, people are going to get left out of that conversation.
So let's talk then about how you would push some of those ideas through. How do you perceive the relationship between city council and administration? Do you think administration is taking too much of the lead and it's just getting rubber stamped by council? Or do you think the council members are taking are getting diverted on some of, you describe them as pet projects. Where do you see the nature of the problem?
Yeah, I think being a bit of an outsider, I can only assume where some of those projects our problems might be coming from. I do have some specific concerns. I think with the gondola project, City Council had requested the business case from administration, and they were denied that information. I think that is a dangerous precedent to set. That if council's deciding whether to proceed or not proceed with certain ideas or projects. I have a little bit of concern with that information being withheld from the decision makers or the gatekeepers, essentially. So I don't think administration has some secret agenda that they're running and trying to run by city council. And we do have a lot of good inquiring city councilors on council. But I personally would not be voting yes to proceed with any project if I was denied full disclosure on what those costs or agreements might be. So those types of things are concerning to me as a constituent and a potential city councilor.
All right, let's dig a little bit more into spending and into taxes as well, so I can understand where you think the balance needs to be. First of all, on the operating side, so obviously one of the biggest ticket items for any city administration is the cost of wages and benefits and salaries. Now, you had mentioned your concern about the number of managers, but what about the increase in union settlements, whether it's because they're moving up the pay grid or they're moving into a different job categorization? Even a freeze isn't really a freeze at a time when we've seen some pretty harsh cutbacks in the private sector. How would you address that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly think city council's role is not to dictate what those union agreements look like. I don't think city council doesn't vote on that. That's much more of a legal and labor negotiation issue. I can have my own personal opinion, but I've knocked on 50% of our ward's doors so far, and I haven't heard one person say we need less police or less road maintenance or anything like that. So a big part of my campaign is going to be to protect those frontline services. It's going to be to identify what those core services look like for the constituents of our ward. And I think I'll leave the labor negotiations to the unions and support that. But I'm not advocating for a reduction in frontline services that provide value to those core services whatsoever. I do think I've worked with lots of large organizations. I think if you're looking to find spending efficiencies, they are within the middle of and top of that organization and not in the service delivery positions. So I honestly think that's where city council needs to dig into and look at communications budgets and how many middle managers and bureaucrats we have, things like that, far before we start reducing frontline services.
All right. Let's then also talk about perhaps council pay, because that's sometimes a flashpoint, but also sometimes a place where you can show some leadership. So when you look at the package for city council, for pension, for transition allowance, for pay, do you think that council members are fairly compensated, or do you think that it should be increased, or do you think it should be decreased?
Yeah, as a vocal critic, I've personally always thought that politicians are overpaid and over-perked and things like that. I'm a little bit on the other side of the fence now, but I don't want to be opportunistic or anything like that. I've oftentimes complained about city council pay. I believe Calgary and Edmonton are amongst the highest in the nation, certainly per capita. That's concerning. I do know when I complained personally to councillors, they've said, well, we put that out to an independent committee and they're tying it to the rates of inflation and we don't want to politicize it. But this year, city council, in an election year, overrode that committee and they voted themselves a 0% raise to look good with the taxpayers. So I just think if you're going to do it in an election year, it's not like there's some secret precedent that they're trying not to break. I think giving yourself a 0% raise in an election year is about as political as it gets. So I'd be happy to look into pay, and it doesn't save the city much money. Like, it's not going to reduce taxes or anything like that, because there's only 13 members of council. But if you're going to ask other people to share in the pain of our economic realities. I honestly think that political leaders need to be front and foremost in leading that initiative, and I'd be happy. I don't know if I'd have any support on city council for looking at compensation, but I'm more than happy to look into that. I don't think Edmonton has pensions quite the same way that Calgary does. From what I've read, Calgary has a pretty golden parachute, I think is sort of the term that's used there. I think Edmonton's eliminated those, but they do have transition allowance and amongst the highest pay in Canada. From what
All right. You mentioned inflation. And so let's talk about sort of the broader approach to spending, because a recent city auditor's report showed that operational spending has grown by 36% above and beyond what would have been if they'd kept it with just in sync with population and inflation growth alone in the last 20 years. Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, no, for sure it is. I believe that city taxes have doubled since 1990. That's not factoring in inflation, but it's outstripped inflationary pressures since then. So it's obviously a problem. People are, they're in hard economic times right now, particularly business owners and people that have worked in sort of the hospitality and service industries. They've just faced a year of turmoil, and there's no appetite or ability to pay ever increasing, taxes. And I think that's what that get back to basics message really looks like municipally and defining core services, because there are so many services that people depend on, the municipality to provide for them, but they've slowly increased their tentacles into areas, of duplication, things like, creating their climate emergency, their own climate plan. We have that being defined at 3 different levels of government right now. We have our province in lawsuits with our country, and the taxpayer loses no matter who wins there. We're paying for both sides of that fight. And I think, defining that core service list will help guide us through a tough economic time, and hopefully tie tax increases if they're needed, to inflation at a maximum. But I think that conversation needs to be one that is two ways, and citizens need to decide, because perhaps they are willing to pay for some of these services, rather than lose them.
Okay, let's talk about the tax side of that. So just to put some numbers around it, as you mentioned, froze property taxes for the first time since 1997. And we've seen the property tax levy on an average home increase from $910 in 2000 to $2,586 in 2019. Then fees on top of that. So let's talk a little bit about your approach to taxes. First of all, do you think that businesses and residents should both be paying more?
Yeah, no, there's no ability to do so right now. Like the businesses in Edmonton, I'm sure the same thing in Calgary are really hurting. If you've made it through this past 16 months, you have no appetite for increased taxes whatsoever. Most residents are in the exact same boat, and they're asking, why have my taxes increased, since 1997 or since whatever date we're going to go back to. They've been outstripping inflation for quite some time, and citizens aren't seeing value for that tax dollar, and they're wondering why they're paying more for less services. Why aren't our parks being mowed, and why are there dandelions everywhere? Why have they debated canceling spraying for mosquitoes, for example? Those are just things that affect everyday citizens. So, I don't think there's any appetite whatsoever for that. But we do need to make sure that we're providing the services that people count on. I think municipal governance provides more day-to-day services than any other level of government. People depend on their municipalities much more to get to work, to maintain the infrastructure, some of those basic type of right in front of your eyes services. So I think we need to really look at what's not on that list, and that's where I'd like to concentrate our effort to reduce or mitigate taxes, or preferably lower them if it's possible.
So if you were to try to lower them, do you think there's a priority to lower residential or business or both? There's a conversation about, should there be a tax shift? Edmonton is one of the municipalities where they do charge a higher a substantially higher rate on non-residential properties than they do on residential. Would you do anything about that?
Yeah, it's actually something I haven't thought about. I saw that Calgary, I think it was last year, did some shifting of that burden between businesses and residents. So in Edmonton, it'd be something that I'd be open to listening about. I think the thing that you want to avoid as a leader, a community leader or a representative, is pitting businesses against residents, because residents own businesses and they're employed by businesses. And I think there's no easy points to be scored by increasing the burden from one to the other, unless there is a inequity in there, and somebody's picking up more of the sort of burden than somebody else is. I believe that might have been the case in Calgary with downtown struggling from what I've read. I don't feel like that's the case here, but I'm absolutely open to listening to that. But I don't hear at resident doors that businesses should be paying more. And I certainly haven't heard from businesses saying that residents should be paying more. I think that we might have that sort of fulcrum point pretty close to acceptable from the eyes of the constituents. But I'd be open to looking into it.
What about new taxation powers? From time to time, especially in the discussion of city charters, the issue of being able to levy new forms of taxes often comes up. Would you be in favor of that?
Yeah, I'm not. As a taxpayer and an occasionally disgruntled taxpayer, having gasoline taxes or property taxes or taxes on water or plastic bags, it's all taxes and it all comes out of the same pocket. I think that the city's inquest into getting new taxation powers is just because residents are losing the appetite to see their property tax bill go up every year, and they'd love to be able to hide taxation increases into, like, at the gas pump where you're paying about 4 or 5 different levies of taxes already. So I'm not all for that. I think that it's best to be upfront. And if taxes go up by 5%, then your property tax bill is going to go up. And if city council's, embarrassed to communicate that message, then maybe they need to, tighten their shoelaces up or get out there and, talk to their constituents more. But I don't think that we should be giving cities the ability to hide taxes somewhere else where residents are going to notice it less, just so that they can trot out a 0% increase in property taxes because it's politically expedient for them.
What do you think should be done about the provincial portion of property tax that appears on everybody's tax bill? I mean, in some municipalities, it's as high as 50%. Do you think that that's reasonable, or do you think there should be a different approach there?
Yeah, so I think cities in the province are always going to be in a bit of a tug of war over who's getting the bigger piece of the pie there. I know that city council oftentimes is saying that we pay more than our fair share to the provincial government. I don't know if that's necessarily correct, but I do think maybe not politicizing it is probably a good idea. Where I think Edmonton, and I'm not sure if it's the same in Calgary, but I suspect it would be, is really getting the short end of the stick. Is the government had recently sort of given us a predictable funding formula for our infrastructure projects, and Edmonton has undergone prioritization activities to find out which projects are going to rise to the top. They're paying for engineering work on that. They're starting all of the pre-steps on those projects, and now the province has decreased their commitments to infrastructure funding over the next 4 years. And Edmonton's not going to have enough money to go around to the projects that they've already prioritized. And I think that's unfortunate. So I'd like to concentrate the discussion less on how much should the cities be giving the province, but what I expect is the province should be giving us predictable funding commitments to the city so that we don't have to go through a reprioritization exercise every 4 years because it's painful. Lots of those discussions are quite heated. LRT would be one. There's lots of infrastructure projects where the populace is somewhat divided on the value of those projects. And I think the province withdrawing their support for for infrastructure puts an undue burden onto municipalities that we don't need at this time. And
Yeah.
so I'd like to look at that side of the piece of how much cities are getting back in commitments rather than potentially digging into the revenue side of that formula.
All right. Thanks for clarifying on that. Let's talk a bit more about LRT. So the Valley Line Southeast has had significant delays during its construction. What is your understanding of the reason for these delays? And is there anything that can be done differently to avoid them?
So, Edmonton has delays on lots of their big ticket projects. I know they oftentimes say, 90% of the projects are on time, but, for sure, our big ticket visual projects are often late and they're going to be really complicated. From what I understand, one of the big delays was they're building the bridge over the river and they found like a buried concrete pile or block from decades and decades ago. So I think they had to remove that or further, again, not an engineer, but further reinforce that base, and that caused quite a few delays. That being said, I would be pretty surprised if procurement and project management weren't also contributing to some of those delays, but it's not something that I've dug into extensively. It is a concern for our ward and members of North Edmonton because we are the north leg of the LRT is planned to come through my ward, and people are concerned about at-grade traffic intersections and where the stations are going to be and how does that affect their land values, and that might just be 8 or 10 years out in the city plan right now. But residents who live along that line are talking about it already. Mm-hmm. So I do think, looking at the delays of that project would be something prudent to do.
All right. I know you already said that it becomes difficult to relitigate projects when they come up because they can be so contentious. But let's talk about some of the big plans the city has to build future extensions. So Valley Line Left, Metro Line Northwest, Capital Line South. Do you support this further LRT expansion, or do you think there's another way to meet transportation needs?
Yeah, I do think there are other ways. I also think every new council shouldn't just come and burn 20 years of work or 10 years of work, every time they step in. That also gets expensive and you get chasing your tail a little bit. So, I used to work downtown before the pandemic, and getting to downtown from our ward is extremely difficult, especially in the winter. The CN rail line that runs across Edmonton east to west intersects our ward, so there's only a couple of points for us to cross that major train intersection. So I really think that having LRT to our ward would be beneficial. But I've been downtown several times since I've been running. It is a ghost town there. I believe that work patterns and paradigms are shifting, and that some of those shifts are going to be permanent, or the trends will continue to be more work from home or community centric, and that it might be prudent for the city to look at where those trends are looking for 20 years out before dumping a couple of $1 billion into a line that might not be bringing anybody to where they work. So right now, today, my constituency does not need LRT to downtown because it's easy to get there right now. There's nobody on the roads. If that returns back to pre-pandemic levels, then I think the city's done their due diligence on what those projects look like, despite their massive expense. The debate over like bus rapid transit or LRT or at-grade intersections or undergrade or overgrade intersections has been fought for a long, long time. I haven't always agreed with those, but I think in a time where City Council needs to demonstrate their prudence, I'm not making it a large campaign plan to reopen that discussion unless it is tied to new data or situations that weren't considered in the original analysis. Right. COVID being one of them. Yeah, and
you touched on a couple of things that are important in how the city develops. So I want to talk to you about the 15-minute community plan, but I also want to talk to you more broadly about the economy. So how optimistic are you about Edmonton being able to recover once we get post-pandemic? Are you seeing factors that give you some encouragement, or do you think there's going to be some other things that council needs to work on?
Yeah, I think I'm probably more optimistic than most. It might be my disposition, but I think people are very resilient. Our business owners have just had a tough time over the last 16 years, and we've lost many of them. That's a horrible reality to be, campaigning to inherit here on the trail. But I do think that it will turn around once we start opening up. I think there might be some hesitancy from some demographics of sort of rejoining the wider workforce, or the economy, getting out to restaurants and things like that. But I do think we're set for a rebound. I think Edmonton is a little bit more tech sector focused, and less reliant on oil revenue than some areas of the province might be. But I do think that City Council will need to, oversee that recovery carefully and think about the types of burdens that are placed upon business owners. I've been hearing about taxation and levies as a major concern, but there's also tons of red tape tied into permitting and things like that. The city could expedite the economy by getting out of the way of business owners a little bit and not being involved in every aspect of their business. And I'd like to explore some of those ideas and things like relief from licensing fees and things like that, if it's possible to provide some relief there.
Right. No, I take your point as well, about the issue of the tech sector being a bigger driver in Edmonton, perhaps more than anywhere else in the province. But where do you see the role of oil and gas in helping to drive some of that recovery?
Yeah, I mean, Edmonton's a pretty northern city. I know lots of people that live here, and then I knew lots of people that were working in the oil patches and sort of using Edmonton as a satellite location to launch from there. So it absolutely affects our bottom line. We might not have giant oil towers downtown, but it certainly puts a ton of revenue and jobs into the economy. I think municipal mandate is limited in how much say we have over pipelines, some of these issues that the province and federal governments are dealing with right now. But I do think that, support for those types of industries is important. I just think the municipalities are better positioned to help localized companies than they are big multinationals and deal with court cases and land rights and all of those types of things. So it's not going to be a big feature of my campaign, but I think it's near and dear to me personally, and it's also a huge factor for the people in Edmonton as well.
All right. The council has, though, through EPCOR, had a drive towards renewable energy. There was a contentious project, the solar farm installation in the River Valley. It passed 7-6. It was a split decision. If you'd been voting on that, what would you have done?
That's a travesty of a vote. Our constituent was the final and deciding vote. Our representative was the final and deciding vote on that vote. I listened to 3 days of public speakers, talked to city council, and EPCOR and engineering companies were the only people supporting it. Every River Valley Alliance, every citizen that spoke was against it. Most councillors made that vote, didn't post about it. They didn't solicit feedback. It would be unpopular, amongst constituents. And that is just an example of some city council members protecting large business interests over the interests of our River Valley, which is like a crown jewel resource. Earlier that year, city council had adopted the city plan. That's like a 20-year plan. And one of the biggest mandates in there is to protect our River Valley at all costs. And then 5 months later, they're voting to build a 99-acre solar farm right on the banks of that in a critical wildlife corridor. It's absolutely infuriating for me as a constituent to not be consulted on issues like that, because I do not see an appetite for Edmontonians for that project in particular. That project comes from an Edmonton mandate where they want 30% of our power generation to be renewable. but we have underutilized wind farms in southern Alberta that could sell us power that's green for much cheaper than constructing that solar panel. But that was on EPCOR property, and EPCOR is a big organization in our town, and there's lots of people protecting their interests. I find it unconscionable that that project was pushed forward, without any public feedback other than those sort of 3 days of, I don't know, hearings or sort of in council debates.
Do you think it can be revisited at this point? As I understand it, EPCOR is 100% owned by the city. So ultimately, I guess the city's in charge. Do you think there's an avenue to revisit it?
I think so. Again, it's going to be part of my platform, but not a huge feature of. I'm not going to try to make that decision or reversing that decision, a major plank of my platform. But I do think that the city probably does until that solar farm is built. I think that they should be able to change the land zoning and usage of that that piece of property. I just really. It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make ecological sense. I'm unsure how that decision went forward. And with a 7-6 vote and 5 or 6 new faces coming into city council, I think that's an excellent opportunity to sort of revisit that decision. And I'd be happy to be on the opposite side of how that vote went.
All right. Let's talk then a bit about housing. When I say, because we're going to talk about development, as I mentioned, the 15-minute community, I want your thoughts on that. But let's talk first about the issue of affordable housing. So when I say affordable housing, what does that word mean to you? What's the priority?
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways to deliver affordable housing. I think everyone agrees that we're not delivering enough. You see the homeless population struggling, even probably more so, I think, in the last 16 months. But Edmonton has been getting this issue wrong forever. So with Mayor Mandel quite some time ago, we had a 10-year plan to end homelessness. We've spent millions of dollars on that plan and haven't chipped away at that problem whatsoever. I think practical solutions need to be explored. I think it's large organizations and governments' knee-jerk reaction is when there's a problem to build a new department, staff it with senior managers, have a director, create a board, talk about it for 5 years, and then do something nominal towards the goal. And that doesn't help the homeless people, and that doesn't help taxpayers either. There are organizations operating in Edmonton like Home Ed and Savita that are experts in the field of affordable housing. They have the clientele, they have the application processes built. They're way more lean and efficient than the government can be on those files. And if they're providing affordable rent subsidies, Edmonton is charging them normal property taxes. So they're paying in excess of $1 million or around $1 million in property taxes. And if the city looked at abating that responsibility, because they're really doing a service to the city by delivering those services cheaper, and they're getting people that want to be housed into homes. I think empowering organizations like that makes economic sense, and they're already in that sphere. The city doesn't need to spin up a whole bunch of red tape and application processes and things to facilitate that. So I'd like to look at creative solutions where we are inviting those types of organizations to the table to say, how can we help you with this goal? And if it looks like abating $1 million in property taxes, like why hasn't Edmonton done that 10 years ago if we were trying to end homelessness? So I'd like to look at creative solutions for how to best tackle that.
Okay.
But I think it starts with listening instead of dictating.
Let's also talk about sort of another aspect of affordability, which is that first-time home buyer. And a lot of times the best way to get entry into the housing market is in some of the new communities where you've got more density and less costly homes than when you go inner city. So with the new plan on this 15-minute communities, it focuses on urban development, promoting more density, more transit, but also restricts new housing development on the outskirts of the city. So are you concerned that might affect affordability in the long run?
Yeah, a little bit. And we had touched before about how taxes are outstripping inflation. So urban sprawl is a major contributor to that. As we build communities on the outsides of our cities, we have to provide fire, policing, infrastructure, water services to them. Where I live on the northern end of Edmonton, the river is a long ways away, so they can't just have their rain collection get there, because we'd have to build, hundreds of miles of water lines in order to do that. So I do think that looking at urban sprawl is important and something that can contribute to lowering the financial burden of the city growing. However, it's a multi-layered problem. If Edmonton decides no more building permits on the edges of cities, people will move to Sherwood Park, and they'll move to St. Albert, and they'll move to Spruce Grove, and then they're not contributing to our property taxes, but they're using our infrastructure to get to Edmonton, to get to their jobs. So I do think that people will live where they want to live, and the city can meet those, goals, or people will move away. So I think it's very slippery slope to try to behaviorally engineer where their people are going to live and where they want to live. But I do think the opportunities of 15-minute communities, you sort of asked about that specifically.
Yeah.
I personally love that there's a grocery store next to me. I think as people are working from home more, we might not be going downtown as often. That might change, our need for LRT, our need for road infrastructure to continually expand. So I do think it's a great goal, but I don't think it's government's role, municipal government, or any level at that for that matter, to dictate how those communities should be built specifically and say there needs to be a grocery store here, there needs to be this. I don't think the government should be engineering how society builds and where people want to live.
Okay. Well, that's a good transition into the last development question I have for you, which is Blackford. So the city is conducting a large development in that airport area, and they're acting as their own developer. Do you think it's a good idea, or would you take a different approach?
Yeah, I definitely take a different approach. Whenever the government gets their fingers into managing something huge, it's expensive. And that's what Blackford has become. There was, unexpected remediation, expenses. It goes on and on. The city could have sold that land for hundreds of millions of dollars and had somebody that knows what they're doing develop that piece of property. But again, the city wants to sort of engineer what that looks like, and they want that community to look like something specific. And that's something specific. I think they wanted thermal heating, for example. But what they found is thermal heating is expensive, and it's going to make houses unaffordable there. And there's going to be just massive houses there. It's going to be unaffordable for every, normal blue-collared worker in Edmonton anyway. But because the thermal plant is going to be so expensive, they're talking about the rest of the city subsidizing the energy bill for that community. And I have a big problem, having a regular job and being a man of modest means, subsidizing $1 million houses because they wanted, thermal heating. It's just an example of the city dictating how people should live rather than letting the market dictate what type of housing and communities people want.
Okay, let's. I have a few other issues to deal with, hopefully quickly here at the end. You'd mentioned, for instance, that you want to focus on core city priorities, and police being one of them. There has been a defund the police movement. What does that mean to you when people say to defund the police?
Yeah, I think it's become politically expedient to say defund or defend, and politicians love when they can stick people on one side of an issue or another and then sort of manipulate that messaging. I think defund is an unfortunate or just bad moniker to have, because lots of times once you get talking about what that actually means, people are like, well, we're not talking about defunding the police. Maybe they shouldn't have named the initiative that way if that's not the message. But protecting core services, to me, looks like making sure that we're not removing one police officer off the front lines. If somebody's stealing a bike in my backyard and I phone the police right now, they're unable to come out to those calls in an expedient manner. And I don't think taking police officers off of our streets is going to improve, safety or that service that EPS provides for us. That being said, I've been involved in organizational transformation for a long time. Every large organization can tighten their belts. There's always middle management and bureaucrat, and there's always spending that can be looked at. I don't think that looking at the budget for policing can be done to the police. It needs to be done in collaboration. I believe that organization is a great organization and provides great services, and I think the city needs to work with them to say, are we spending every tax dollar in the right place? And can we trim the EPS budget by 2% or 3% or 5% or whatever that looks like to maybe better support the homeless issue or mental health supports, some of those more progressive ideals that defund the police embrace. Yeah. But it needs to look like a different competition that's not an argument over whether the police are, have sort of systemic issues built within them. I think they're just a large organization like any else, and Edmontonians depend on those frontline services. But I'm absolutely open to asking all of our departments that the city looks over, where can we tighten our belts and what types of jobs or services are essential.
Well, related to that, Edmonton's garbage collection is already half private. There's discussion as well of potential other areas where you could privatize, like golf course operation. What's your basic view on that? Do you think that that's something worth pursuing?
Yeah, my basic view is not for a large initiative to sort of privatize everything we can. You had mentioned a couple little issues. I'm a golfer. The city owns 3 golf courses. And, they're very nice golf courses, but I was shocked to learn as a taxpayer that they're the only golf courses in this, the whole city that are losing money. And that is as a taxpayer that's trying to, value where those core services are. I don't think golfing is a core service for municipalities. I don't think people depend on the city to provide golf courses to them. There's golf courses all over the place. That's one area that I would seriously look at, either having an outside company run those facilities or potentially entering, an agreement where that's not developed into condos. We don't need more condos there. They are quite beautiful courses, but to keep them as perhaps a golf amenity without the city being invested in there.
Okay,
last year, it's maddening that the city's losing money on golf courses. It's such a silly thing.
All right, let me ask you a couple other questions about, for instance, speed limits. They dropped the residential speed limit to 40 kilometers per hour. Do you agree with that decision? Because there are some who wanted to go even further to 30 kilometers an hour. What do you think?
Yeah, so as a non-traffic expert, I probably would rely on some of the studies and consultations that the city has done already. I do know that some people want it slower and some people want it faster. I have kids. They play, in our front yard on occasion. I haven't seen less speeding, whether the speed limit is 50 or 40. People that are going to speed down that road are going to speed down that road. And I don't think paying, millions of dollars to put new signs up every couple of years is maybe the best investment. I'd like to see less photo radar on our freeways and the head days and more enforcement in areas around schools and daycares and parks and things like that. I don't think that speed limit matters all that much in terms of, who's going fast and who's not.
All right. I'm taking a look at a picture here in front of me, the new think tank library downtown. Do you love it or do you hate it?
I'm not an architecture expert, but just looking at it, it doesn't grab my eye. I haven't actually been inside of it yet, but I've heard it's like pretty spectacular inside. I think libraries are very important. I think they're probably a core service that the municipality provides. But I'm not a fan of the visual aspect of that. But again, nobody should ask me my opinion on what buildings should look like specifically.
All right, I've got just a couple final questions, just about the role of a council member. So there is going to be a referendum in conjunction with the municipal ballot. That's a provincial referendum on equalization. What is your general view about putting matters to the vote of the general public? There have been municipal issues put to referendum in the past. Can you think of any good candidates for that in this election? Or would you prefer as an elected council member to make the decisions yourself?
That's a really interesting idea. I am all for referendums or a move towards more direct representation. It really annoys me when our councillors don't ask the opinions of constituents, then their constituents get mad, and then they're making excuses after that. So I'd like to see that sort of direct engagement increase in general. Our city just redesigned the bus routes. 99% of the doors that I've knocked on are unsatisfied with that change. City council has said we had to make the change. The old system was unsustainable, but all of those things could be true. But I've never seen a more one-sided issue than that issue has in my life of following politics. People feel so strongly against those changes. If they put that on the ballot as an example, if you're saying there's one issue, it would be the easiest win for the residents of Edmonton ever, and I think it would be embarrassing and shocking for City Council and everybody that voted to push that through.
All right, last question, because you will often find this, that the city administration recommends something saying it's better for the entire city, but your own constituents in your ward want you to do something else. How would you balance that? What would you do?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I think it's a fundamental struggle. I think oftentimes you'll find councillors, in order to get things that they need for their ward, negotiate with each other. If one ward needs a rec center and somebody else needs something, they'll lobby and advocate for each other. I don't know if that's the most effective way to go about it, but I don't believe that people are inherently selfish. And I think that if the South Side needs a rec center or downtown needs something, or other wards, that as your representative, it's my responsibility to help demonstrate to the people of my ward why that's a benefit to the city as a whole. And if I'm not doing that, that's a failure on my part, because I don't think people are so short-sighted to say, only build stuff in my ward, forget the rest of the ward. They should have no rec centers, as an example. I think that the constituents of Edmonton are educated and up to speed on these issues enough, and City Council should be putting that decision to them.
All right. Thank you so much for the conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.
You got it. That is your candidate for Ward 2, Anirniq,
Yep.
Tyler Zutz.